So, Buongiorno back in the house. Adjusting is making sure that everything is working properly. Setting down my coffee on a Sunday morning, and I have to be to my other job soon. And once again, in the immortal words of Britney Spears, whoops, I did it again, folks. I did it again. There's a little bit of lag. There's a few technical difficulties with with getting the lectures up for Com 100. So this is probably going to be hitting the airwaves, going out to the masses. So eagerly awaiting that my pearls of wisdom, probably be going up tomorrow night. But having said that, as far as, being under the gun or not, we got to remember, and I had forgotten that mid-semester break this week, which means that we are not, I repeat, we are not going to meet on Tuesday due to the break. All right, I'm going to go over chapter 2 today, which is chapter 3, remember, in the book. Remember what I was saying concerning the way that Mr. Berger does his chapters. Remember what we were saying about chapter 2. Remember chapter 2. Chapter 2 consisting of photos. See, photos. And that chapter 3 is the one that you should read for this week, right? And then after chapter 3, chapter 4 is, guess what, folks? Photos. Photos. So this week, you should be reading chapter 5, which I often call chapter 3, because why? Why do we do that? Because there's only 4 chapters in the book that actually need to be read, and we need to make sure that we're on the same page about that. Because every single semester, Buongiorno puts out a midterm essay guideline, and people invariably try to write an essay comparing a chapter with pictures with a chapter with actual text, and that always turns into a disaster. What we have to understand about Berger and these 4 chapters and what he's attempting to do in them is that he is attempting to build a thesis. What's a thesis? Everybody at this point should understand what a thesis is. Piece by piece, with each chapter, he is attempting to build an argument, which culminates in the final chapter, and we'll get to that. The final chapter being primarily on the advertising and what he calls, what the British term, the publicity industry. And on how all of these different conventions and subject matters and styles and Western oil painting will kind of be used in advertising and publicity in different ways. And ultimately, the argument that Berger is going to make is the more things change, the more things stay the same. Not only do the more things change, the more things stay the same, but perhaps things have actually gotten worse. All right, he wants to pose this to us, and he wants to do it building arguments. All right, in the first chapter, he's basically talking about some of the underlying assumptions of the Western perspective tradition. Remember, we were talking about this whole idea of this kind of gods, this kind of, the spectator taking the role of owner, and being kind of distanced from the subject matter, and how it was kind of all arranged for him or her. And some of the underlying psychological and sociological and cultural assumptions of that, and how it kind of, and he'll get to this later, but how this way of seeing starts to develop during the same period of development that Renaissance mercantile capitalism basically will spring up. The buying and selling of objects, all right? The acquisition of things, finance will start right around the time of all these artistic traditions. And he wants to talk about the ways in which this way of seeing kind of enforces or reinforces certain ways that we kind of frame up the world. All right, the ways that we see the world, and how these things kind of mutually reinforce each other. You know, it's like, you know, commodities, and we've already talked about this transition that was made due to the arisal of photography. This transition that was made with oil paintings into commodities due to their uniqueness, which were opposed to this prevalence of reproductions, all right? This whole move towards what Karl Marx would call commodity fetishism, all right? And we'll have to talk more about commodity fetish. What is it? You know, this move towards this preoccupation with owning and possessing stuff. And, you know, and also in relation to that, the ways in which human relationships and people are also magically transformed, not magically, but ideologically transformed into things where people become objects for each other, you know, or where a system wherein your labor or your talents are bought and sold as a quantifiable commodity. In chapter 2 or chapter 3, depending on how you look at it, he wants to concentrate on a very prevalent genre in classic oil painting, and that was the genre of the female nude. And he will, hopefully you've watched the episode, you've looked at the chapter, and, you know, and Berger coming out in around, you know, 73, 74 with this book and this television series was kind of looked at as being one of the first of what they call second wave feminists, even though he was a white guy. A lot of his observations in chapter 3 are of a feminist nature. Because what does he want to say? What does he want to tell us in that chapter about the female nude? That there is that the ways in which the female form is presented as one of objectification, and not necessarily one wherein that person's persona or personality or individuality is concentrated on as much as that person as a possessible / desirable / submissive object, you know. And, you know, for those of you who have not been living in the cave, Plato's cave, we realize that, you know, a new kind of social movement erupted in the mainstream media concerning, called the hashtag #MeToo movement, which was primarily a kind of coming out of women, primarily professional women, but women from all walks of life that once again had to call the culture out, you know, specifically Western culture or American culture, on the ways that women were being assaulted and taken advantage of, and up to and including being raped in the workplace. You know, this whole Harvey Weinstein thing, you know, that people had known about forever, and then all these others, so that the culture had a kind of reawakening, and needed to have a reawakening about all this stuff. And I don't think that it's too much of an intellectual stress for us to start to see how maybe some of these behaviors that have perennially gotten perpetrated through Western culture kind of find their seeds, very, very early in the game, and that's just by way of prologue. That's what we're going to talk about today, but I want to go back to it. But by the way, it's like I got this. I think this thing is really kind of cool. A friend of mine brought it. I have a friend that brings over all these weird objects. He just likes to buy a lot of stuff and sell a lot of stuff, and every once in a while, it's like, he'll fall into possession of something that I really kind of dig. And you can see this. It's like, it's actually a very well detailed and specific in terms of the topography of the movement, and there's different settings. It's very cool. I like cool shit, and why is he saying this? Why is he bringing this thing into the lecture? How is he going to work? How is Bongiorno going to work this thing into the lecture, you may ask? Well, I'm going to answer that. The full moon, the yellow moon in the yellow setting tends to be emblematic, symbolic, imagistic of October, things autumnal, things Halloweeny, and I think we need to address like the fact that we are already like at October 11th, and we're starting to get deep into October. We're starting to get deep into the dark interior of 2020 October. Who knows what chills and spills it will present for us. But anyway, on the syllabus, we have been talking about a 2-page short essay assignment coming out and a due date of, it was supposed to come out on Thursday. I was going to send the guidelines out on Thursday. That didn't happen due to my life basically just being a catastrophe right now, for all intents and purposes. So I'm going to get that out this week, but I think we're going to move the due date back past the 22nd to give you enough time to get it in. All right, so be looking at your emails, be looking for that. There'll be like 4 options. You basically have to do a 2-page essay. I do not need a treatise. I do not need a novel. I do not need something that will stand the test of time and become, a great essay read by the children of the future. I just need you to answer the questions that will be posed. You'll have 4 different options. There'll be one on the Matrix, and you'll have to hit the point. There'll be one on Arthur Berger's introduction to Seeing is Believing, and there'll be one on chapter 1 of John Berger, and there'll be one on chapter 2. And basically, what I'm looking for in these 2-page essays, 2 pages too, folks, not a page and not a page and a couple of sentences on page 2, 2 full pages. All right, I don't need citations for this. All right, but everything will be there. It needs to be, double space, 12-point font, all of that. If you want to do citations and use MLA format, you can do that. I'm not asking for it. But all this is really is a kind of mini assignment that will give me an indication of your writing skills. Will give me a little bit of an indication. You can't really tell a lot in 2 pages, but you can. And it'll give me an indication about whether you're actually getting the material, whether you're getting it conceptually. Because I know, and I'll run this disclaimer, it's like I know that a lot of this stuff, it's like you might not be used to, because a lot of it is kind of philosophical or theoretical or psychological. We're talking about some heavy and often 4-dimensional ideas, and it becomes a question of whether, under these conditions, and especially under these conditions, where, usually when we meet, I am, confronted with this faceless panopticon of people that may or may not be there. I don't know, and it's very hard for me to gauge, unless you're like really, we do have the blog as a place where that should be a place wherein you're making statements of a nature that you're proving to me that you get it. Or asking me questions that would lead me to believe that you are either, that you are getting it enough that if you're not getting, I know this is like crazy talk, that you're getting it enough that if you're not getting it, you know the right questions to ask, you get it enough that the questions you're asking me aren't like, from like Cloud Cuckoo Land or Narnia or whatever, So pushing back that probably for a few days, and trying to just kind of keep the train on the track. All right, so remember, bullet points here today. We're not meeting Tuesday. And since we're not meeting Tuesday, I would very, very, I'm going to strongly emphasize that you view and comment on the video, because I'm starting to see this kind of falling off of the numbers. All right, it's like there's 19 people registered, and then I'm like going to the blog and I'm seeing, and for the people that are like, being diligent, awesome, and you know who you are, and for the people that are just dropping the ball or not commenting, you also know who you are too, so you need to kind of step up to this, because it's the only real, the blog itself is one of the only real concrete ways for me to kind of keep track of you and know that you are present in some way, and that you are kind of getting it, so we need to step up on the blog, folks. You know where it is. I've been sending out emails diligently with the PowerPoints so that you can do it. So you can do this, all right? With no further ado, let's get into Chapter 2, Episode 2, all right? And some of the opening ideas that Berger addresses here, he says early on, he makes this distinction, this kind of overall distinction, all right? And now, and let's not forget, he's writing in the mid-70s, all right? He's writing almost 40 years ago about certain ways in which he makes a distinction between the presence and the power of men and the presence and power of women, and how historically, all right, he makes these kind of general analyses, all right, about just the relationship of the sexes in general, all right. Other thing I've already done this to death, but I've got to run a disclaimer, and I'll put it even on the blog. There are some slides here with nudity, all right. We're all adults here, So, what does he say early on? A man's presence is dependent upon the promise of power which he embodies. The promise of power which he embodies. If the promise is large and credible, his presence is striking. All right? If it is small and incredible, he is found to have little presence. All right? He's making some assumptions about men and power and the expectations that we have about masculinity and male power in our culture. All right? The promised power may be moral, physical, temperamental, economic, social, sexual, but its object is always exterior to the man. What is he trying to say here? It's always about something exterior to the man, the power that the man exudes over. What's he trying to say? It's always about men's power derives from what they can do. What they can do at work. Men have always, historically been seen as the builders, the building men, the men of science, the men who do things, the adventurers, and also the protectors, the warriors, the generals, the conquerors, the leaders, That, it just was what it was. We lived in a patriarchal culture. So it's always a question of it's always about this kind of rough and tumble image of what kind of power that men have over their fellow men and over their environment, right? These expectations that are made upon males, to be the masters of, whatever it is, whether it be, sports culture. Has this changed? Has a lot of this stuff changed since Berger made these observations? Yeah, a lot of it has changed, and we know the ways in which it has changed. Has a lot of it stayed the same? Yeah. We need to be able to parse the things that have changed and the things that have stayed the same. All right? Because certainly, if things had changed so radically for female empowerment between the time that he wrote this in 2017 and 2020, we certainly wouldn't have had to have a Me Too movement. All right? Which was what? A symptom and an indicator of the ways in which women were still being harassed and basically given a hard time. Has there been a new form of empowerment since that? Yes. But it begs the question, if things had been so equal before Weinstein or before all these other, creeps kind of were exposed and these women came forward and say, hey, this guy did this, hey, this guy did that, and he's supposedly the dude, it's if things had been going apace, this wouldn't have happened. All right, so obviously there were some shortcomings in our culture that needed to be addressed. By contrast, he says, and then he contrasts the women's presence. He says, by contrast, a woman's presence expresses her own attitude to herself. Her own attitude to herself. And defines what can and cannot be done to her, all right? Her presence is manifest in her gestures, voice, opinions, expressions, clothes, chosen surroundings, taste. Indeed, there is nothing she can do which does not contribute to her presence, all right? Presence for a woman is so intrinsic to her person that men tend to think of it as an almost physical emanation. All right, a kind of heat or smell or aura. All right, what's he trying to say here, my friends? Because I need to be very, very careful with the wording with this in order for you to get the right sense of exactly kind of, interpreting this for you. Man's relationship to himself is one that he really doesn't. He's not. And by cultural necessity, he's not as self-conscious as the woman due to the fact that his role, the role that is allocated to man, is more about doing stuff, right? As opposed to women being more conscious of their presence due to the fact that we'll get into this. Why did this develop? This sense of interior presence, because women were kind of put in this position where they needed to stay very, very conscious of themselves, and we'll explain why. And we'll explain how in many ways, unfortunately, it was a defense mechanism and it was a survival mechanism. To survive in this world dominated by these rough and tumble male warriors and statesmen and blah blah blah, and to be given this subservient role, whether as the provider for the sexual appetite or the bearer of the children or the keeper of the heart, the role that women, or the maker of the food in the kitchen, the role that was kind of relegated to women and imposed upon women for many, many centuries. They needed to have a kind of self-awareness about themselves, and we'll talk about why. Because it is a kind of red pill in many ways, and it's not pretty, He says a woman must continually watch herself. She's almost continually accompanied by her own image of herself. All right? While she's walking across a room or while she is weeping at the death of her father, she can scarcely avoid envisaging herself walking or weeping. From her earliest childhood, she has been taught and persuaded to survey herself continually. To survey herself continually. All right? And he's trying to say that, and by emphasis on taught and persuaded. All right? Taught and persuaded meaning that this whole way of being, for the female gender was not necessarily something that was a choice that one made. It was kind of socially conditioned, by a male-dominated society that you needed to be like this. And so she comes to consider the surveyor and the surveyed within her as two constituent yet always distinct elements of her identity as a woman. All right? And remember when we were talking in the introduction to Seeing is Believing about Jung's ideas on the anima and the animus, right? Jung's idea that has a lot of validity when we think about it anecdotally, that within every psyche, whether you're a male or a female, there are these two poles, which he called the anima and the animus. The male pole within the female, and the female element within the male, and that it was kind of like a dual persona that would manifest itself. Because what Berger wants to say is that the surveyor in the woman, all right, the woman has a tendency to have a kind of dual personality to the degree, and this isn't saying like a double personality or, Sybil hearing voices. It's not that. It's the idea of this kind of bifurcation in the female psyche in which she's constantly surveying herself, and he says that the surveyor within the woman is predominantly male. That the surveyor aspect, the part of the woman's psyche that is surveying herself, is male. All right? When we meet in a brick and mortar setting, and I do this lecture, invariably what I do is for the first half of the lecture, I tell the men to, in Italian, the term is stata zitta. All right? I tell the men to stata zitta, which is to do this. All right? And let the women speak. All right? Let the women speak in the class. Why, you may ask? Does Buongiorno do this? Because he wants to hear from the female students, and he wants to corroborate with them whether this is indeed the case, whether women actually do this. Being Buongiorno Lesticek, being of the opposite gender, wants to be able to confirm and corroborate this experience and see if it's still an experience as opposed to something that has gone away. So something that you female students may want to do in the blog is answer that question. Is this necessarily true? Do you find that to be true? And argue it. from either, yeah, I think this is true, or no, I don't necessarily feel that way, but to be able to, like, glean anecdotal evidence in order for us to be able to say whether this is true or not, And he'll go on here. He'll say, one might simplify this by saying that men act. Think about, like, Action Man, it's like, whatever, TV shows, it's like, has this stereotype changed a little bit? Do we see a lot more representations of women, being the actor, the one who acts, the one who, and I mean, the unfortunate thing about that is usually those personifications of, like, the active woman usually involves them being in the role of, like, a superhero, of playing the male role as far as being a character who deals out violence, or a warrior of some type. We have Wonder Woman, but we see a lot more representations of what, the media, in all their wisdom call, like, positive, strong female types. That seems to be a thing. We cannot deny that. And it seems to be more of a trend. But is it still, like, has it gotten to a point where it's 50-50, my friends? I don't think so. And are there certain ideologies we have to understand about this? Yeah, I think we do. That are tricky and nuanced, right? About these forms of representation. Is it a true equality? Or is it more of a kind of, quid pro quo? So he says, men look at women, women watch themselves being looked at. Is this true in every case? It's like, and here's the other thing I want to say. All right. Because I'm sure that many of you watching this right now are coming up with all kinds of instances and circumstances and date and things where that are exceptions to this rule. That are exceptions to this rule. Is he saying that these exceptions don't exist? Not to my knowledge. All right. Is he saying that there is a kind of predominant kind of tendency for these things that not barring certain exceptions? Yeah, I think what he's trying to say is that in general, this is the thing. All right, and we have to understand that instead of trying to cherry pick the arguments and find all kinds of exceptions, I think we have to understand it and its basic general underpinnings, right? This determines not only most relations between men and women, but also the relation of women to themselves. The surveyor of a woman in herself is male, the surveyed female. Thus she turns herself into an object, and most particularly an object of vision, an object of sight. Hence we have a painting here from the Renaissance, and we'll talk more about this. We have to remember, and we need to be very, very clear that 99.9% of these paintings of the female nude are being painted by men, all right? And the assumptions that men make, all right? Here we have a Renaissance painting, woman looking into a mirror at herself, and he talks a little about this, all right? He'll go on to talk about the whole story in Genesis of Adam and Eve, and how it kind of sets the tone, how the very first, in the beginning, during the chapter in Genesis, wherein God purportedly makes Adam, and then he makes Eve, because Adam is lonely and wants a mate, which is not an unreasonable thing, right? So God's like, okay, I'm gonna give you someone, and then they interact, but they're in the garden, remember? And in the garden, they are in a state of what has been symbolically always kind of looked at and shaped as one of innocence. All right? And a lack of shame. All right? And Berger will unpack the whole, like, Adam and Eve thing. All right? Through different paintings that show it, the development of the way that we kind of see the Adam and Eve story. And he'll pose the question, what is striking about this story? They become aware of being naked. Remember, right? It's like after, like, it's like, you know, there was this situation where God creates all this stuff, right? Makes all this stuff, like, did the heavens and the earth on this day, and then I did this on this day, and then I built the rivers and the mountains on this day, and then I did this. He had a very, very, very busy, like, production schedule, right? And he had to do a lot of multitasking. And then he makes the animals, right? And then he makes Adam. And he has Adam get to name all the animals. And then he makes Eve, right? And then he tells Adam and Eve, the humans within his creation, within this grand creation, he says, there is this one thing that that there's one prohibition. You got all this, all right? You've got the Garden of Eden, all right? It's like, it's cool. There's this one thing. Don't go over and be eating anything off that tree over there, which he termed the tree of knowledge, all right? And in some biblical exegesis or interpretation, it is usually translated from the Greek as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He says, you can have all this, just don't do this. All right? Well, you know, things are cool for a while, and then, you know, a situation arises where Eve's kind of off doing her own thing, and a gentleman, you know, in the guise of a serpent, or so we're told, comes to Eve and says, listen, all that stuff your boss told you about that tree is bullshit. Go over there and eat some. How dare him? How dare him tell you not to eat that? Right? So she's like, okay. You know, like, you know, we don't know what level of persuasion there was involved in that, but we do know it was the, you know, that, you know, for the sake of our narrative, for our storyline, it was the archangel Lucifer, you know, who got some skills, you know, that we know about that seem to be running rampant right now in our culture. He seems to have some skills in making things really dark. All right, so what does he do? She gets the apple, she eats it. She goes over. She's like, hey, this ain't that bad. Why don't you try some, Adam? And he munches on it. Well, lo and behold, you know, God being God, comes down, and he's like, hey, wait a minute. Guess what? I saw what you did. And I don't know why. It's like, well, you did what you did. You know, it's like, you know, and being the father, he's like, well, I told you not to do this, and you did it. But the biblical story, we need to put specific emphasis on the fact that when God comes down and says to Adam and Eve, hey, why did you guys do this? The first thing that Adam does is what, my friends? He points to Eve and he goes, she told me to do it. She did it. Right? There you go, my friend. He says, what's striking about this story? And then, what else happens within this? When God comes down, they've eaten from this tree, and now they are aware of something. They are aware that up to this point, they had been without clothes. They didn't need them. You know, it was the Garden of Eden. They must have kept temperature control at a certain point. You know, they probably had, like, central heating and central cooling and all that. We don't know. But they didn't need clothes. All right. When God comes down and confronts them, they realize that they are naked and they feel shame. Finally, we're naked. It's kind of like you ever have one of those recurring dreams? Anybody ever have that dream where you go to school and you forgot to put your clothes on, you got a big exam? It's like everybody seems to have. I had a dream. You show up to school and you're naked, and you're like, how did I get it? It's like, I don't know. A lot of people do. What is striking about this story? They become aware of being naked because as a result of eating the apple, each saw the other differently. Now there is a change in the perception because they have eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now this new element enters their consciousness of morality and guilt and ethics and shame. All that. Nakedness was created in the mind of the beholder. Now they realize they're naked. Before they didn't even know. The second striking fact is that the woman is blamed, and she's the one that's punished, right? She's the one that's punished, by being made subservient to the man. And God's like, here's your punishment. From here on out, you do what he says, And it continues to, and that meme, that somewhat toxic meme, seems to have continued to spread like a pandemic in certain forms of Christianity in this culture. That the woman is the helpmate, and is an auxiliary to the man. And there are some, dare I say, people that deem themselves, religious or Christian or whatever, who kind of still perpetrate this horseshit. That's what it is. My journal pulling no punches today. Berger will go on to say that later on this will all kind of be represented as a tableau, that it will be more like of a kind of artist will do more to kind of show it as a series of events instead of one event, and then even later than that, the emphasis will always kind of be on the event itself, the event of the awareness of nakedness. And then he'll actually show it in ads and stuff like that. He'll bring up another great biblical tale, Susanna and the Elders. Go back and wiki that if you don't know about that Susanna who spied on, who was she was looking in the mirror naked, and there were some guys let's call it what it was, checking it out, But then he'll talk about how a preponderance of a lot of these depictions, not only of Susanna, but of Renaissance nude in general have are looking in a mirror or have a mirror in their hand, all right? And he'll talk about the hypocrisy involved in that. And what he'll say is, and what Berger will say about these artists is that you painted a naked woman because you enjoyed looking at her, right? You put a mirror in her hand and you called the painting Vanity. Remember, this one up here was called, actually, Hans Memling was called Vanity. It was actually called Vanity, all right? The woman looking in the mirror, all right? But what Berger is going to say here is this. He says, thus, you call the painting vanity, thus you are morally condemning the woman whose nakedness you had depicted for your own pleasure, right? He said the real function of the mirror was otherwise. It was to make the woman connive in treating herself as first and foremost a sight. Let's run that again. The real function of the male artist putting a mirror in the hand of the nude was to connive. What is connive? To kind of pull the wool or coerce, or it was kind of like propaganda. I mean, one can say it was like propaganda for the female's perception of herself. To start to treat herself as an object within these paintings, there is a kind of set of assumptions and implications about what a woman's worth is, right? And more often than not, it wasn't about who she was or what her thoughts and feelings were about stuff or what her dreams and hopes were about her pain or about her interior. It was usually about what? Her as a sight, her body, it's like her as an aesthetic object. And an object that like other objects to be possessed, right? Because he'll talk about the ways in which these nudes are all painted. Before that, he says, he talks about another common subject for male paint, for the paintings of the nudes. The mythological story of the Greek story of Paris and the goddesses Venus, or Aphrodite, and Hera, the mother of the gods, and I believe Athena. I think those were the three. And Paris was like, I guess he was kind of like the Achaean version of like Brad Pitt or something like that. He was like this dude. He was like the dude at the time. And even the goddesses were just so smitten by Paris. They were just like, it's like they were like, I want him. No, I want him. It's like, so ultimately they come down and they say, like, which of us is the fairest? Paris. and the award is a golden apple, and he has like the golden apple, which is like the trophy to give to the one who is the fairest. He gives it to Venus, the goddess of beauty, the goddess of love, and it kind of makes sense, it's being the goddess of beauty. One would say, she probably had an edge in the game. So, but what Berger wants to say about this thing is this. He says that there's a further element now added to the narrative. And the element is one of judgment. Now we're judging things, all right? And you think about it. You think about everything from models and advertising and actresses and pornography. And it's like, it's not a secret that Facebook, the social media network, was started depending on who you talk to, as this site where girls were rated hot or not. Like all this kind of just kept on bubbling back up. This idea of like judgment predicated on beauty, or whatever the standard was for beauty at any given time. And we understand that those standards have shifted and changed and went back and forth, but a lot of it has stayed the same. Paris awards the apple to the woman he finds the most beautiful. Thus, beauty becomes competitive. Right? Hence a whole culture of competition with beauty and envy that comes with that. All right? And the envy that comes with that. And the way that women are rewarded for beauty sometimes, or the way in which women will use their beauty to forge ahead with a career, right? And make a lot of money based on their looks. Thus, beauty becomes competitive. Today, the judgment of Paris has become the beauty contest. Now, the beauty contest is no longer like a really big thing, but once again, it's like, I hate to remind you guys, that the chief executive officer of this country had a thing for the ladies, up to and including the fact that he tended to run and own beauty pageants. This was, the Donald's thing, so that the Donald kind of fits the role, of this kind of guy. And we know numerous instances where he's either said or done things that would lead one to believe that, he's kind of, concerned about, looks above other things, depending on, considering his, dating and mating record. Those who are not judged beautiful are not beautiful. Those who are judged beautiful are given the prize. And this is the chilling sentence here. What is the prize, Berger says? The prize is to be owned. The prize is to be owned by the judge. That is to say, to be available for him. All right? That was the prize. All right? And this is what you've been living through. This was a painting by, gotta remember, this was a painting by Lely. It was commissioned by, Buongiorno, what are you doing? Charles II commissioned a secret painting from Lely, a famous painter. It is a highly typical image of the tradition. Nominally, it might be a Venus and Cupid. In fact, it is a portrait of one of the king's mistresses, Nell Gwyn. It shows her passively looking at the spectator, staring at her naked, all right? And we have to understand that one of the primary conventions of a lot of these paintings is one in which the women are supine, meaning they're laying there. They're usually frontal. They're not always covered. And they're usually in what Berger would call a kind of languid, kind of de-energized, deactivated role. All right? That they're just kind of laying there waiting expectantly. And that the overall milieu is one of physical or sexual availability. Here I am, right? And that this was a convention of these paintings. This was a stylistic convention of these paintings. I have no idea what Cupid is doing there. I don't think he's up to any good, but say love you. He'll go on to talk about other traditions where sexual activity is depicted in the East, in the Far East, in India, right? In China, in the Mideast, all right? Different cultures and different religions, how this relationship was imaged, right? He'll say in Indian art and Persian art, a lot of African art, a lot of pre-Columbian art, meaning art within North America, North and Central and South America before Columbus. Nakedness is never supine in that way. It's never just kind of laying there waiting to be had. But it's more, in these traditions, the theme of the work is sexual attraction. It is likely to show active sexual love as between two people. The woman is active as the man. The actions of each absorbing the other. That each is a participant in this kind of give and take of this kind of feminine and masculine energy. And he shows other instances here of that in the book. Where does he show them? Here in the book of, this is not going to work. Buongiorno is not working. It's just not working. It's not working. Unless I adjust it, which I can't right now. But he says that the action usually involves this kind of bilateral yin and yang, like the man being as active as the woman, right? He'll go on to say he's going to make this distinction between nakedness and nudity. All right, that is one of the takeaways of this chapter. You've got to get that. All right, to be naked, he says, is to be oneself. To be nude is to be seen naked by others. Right? So he makes this distinction. Nakedness, to be naked is to be oneself. Unashamed, unabashed, warts and all, this is who I am. There's almost a kind of, one can say there's almost a kind of psychological component to it. one in which a person is not putting on a facade, is not there, or not trying to be sexual. That it's just more about it's more of an existential state than it is one in which you're being looked at. He says to be nude is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized as oneself. To be nude is to be seen naked. To be nude is to be seen naked by others and yet not recognized for oneself. A naked body has to be seen as an object in order for it to become a nude. And he'll talk more about this idea of the way in which certain exceptional artists actually painted these exceptional nudes where stylistically you got more of a sense of the woman as something more than an object. That the most gifted artist could oftentimes, not necessarily the most gifted artist, but the artist with a certain regard for the woman that they were portraying, will give them, through this kind of je ne sais quoi stylistic treatment, a kind of personality, right? Then we know what they're less than an object. A naked body has to be seen as an object in order to become nude. The sight of it as an object stimulates the use of it as an object, right? If we see it as an object, then it becomes a question of use. How do we use the object? Because remember, objects are to be used. There's not a in an object. There's no like I-thou, what Martin Buber would call like the I-thou relationship that goes on with that. And this is just an update from a girly magazine. Don't get all crazy, because I'm trying to make it, this isn't about being bad. This is about making an intellectual argument about something, all right, using a modern depiction. And we want to pose the question, have things changed that much between this and the ways in which we use these representations, right? To be naked is to be without disguise. To be on display is to have the surface of one's own skin, the hairs of one's own body, turned into a disguise, he says. Into a disguise, which, in that situation, can never be discarded. The nude is condemned to never being naked, right? The nude is condemned to never being naked. It is never allowed to express the inner being of the object / subject being. It's like, when a man is, or a woman is looking through a pornographic magazine, they're not really concerned about that person's feelings, right? That they're looking at. They're more thinking about, the ways in which the publisher and the photographer want that person to think. And it's like, what is the message of both of these for all intents and purposes? The message is what? The message is take it. Take it. I'm available. Take me. All right? I'm available. For what? For playing checkers? I don't think so. All right? So we got that. This painting was a present sent to the Grand Duke of Florence, from the Grand Duke of Florence to the King of France. The boy kneeling on the cushion and kissing the woman is Cupid. Here, she is Venus. By the way, here's the thing he wants to say about this one. The way that her body is arranged, here, has nothing to do with him. By the way, her body has nothing to do with their kissing. Her body is turned in a way in which she is presenting herself frontally as being available to the spectator or the owner, all right? The owner of the painting and many times the owner of the woman being depicted. That's the guy's the king gets a picture of his, we call it a gumad in Italian, the gumad, which was always a, it's like back where I came from, man. It's like there would always be this little chit chat, gossip about so and so having a gumad, all right, which was basically a mistress, that he was like, he had something on the side, as we say. But a lot of times these paintings were paintings of men of power and men of royalty, portraying their girls, their girlfriends, in mythological kind of ways. But the way her body is arranged has nothing to do with their kissing. Her body is arranged in the way it is to display it to the man looking at the picture. This picture is made to appeal to his sexuality. It has nothing to do with her sexuality. We have to remember in these pictures, it's about him. It's all about him. It's not about her. It's not about what she wants. And he talks about this stylistic tendency to always, the woman is always usually shaved, bare of hair. Because he'll say that hair represents more of a kind of aggressive, more dominant, more like on an equal status, right? At least in cultural ideas. This picture, it has nothing to do with her sexuality. It has everything to do with the surveyor. It is true that sometimes a painting includes a male lover, like this one, but the woman, still, her attention is very rarely directed to the male lover. Often she looks away from him, or she looks out of the picture towards the one who considers himself her true lover. And then he'll use this term, this kind of chilling term, I believe for the first time, the spectator owner, right? She's shown as being with a man, but she always has her eyes on the voyeur or the spectator, all right? Think about this concept. Think about this stylistic preponderance, folks, all right? Think about porn. Think about the porn industry and the way that women are presented. We see a lot of, nowadays we see a lot of, porn almost invariably is about the male spectator watching it, identifying with the male, up to and including this whole subgenre of porn called point of view, which in point of view porn, it's literally like you're kind of put in the driver's seat, so to speak, right? But even before that, it's like in the porn industry, women are always engaging in sex and they're looking at the camera, they're looking at the spectator, so that this modality plays itself out in a lot of different places. Then he'll say there are a few exceptional nudes in the European tradition of oil painting, to which very little of what has been said above applies. Indeed, they are no longer nudes. They break the norms of the art form. They are paintings of loved women, more or less naked, among the hundreds of thousands of nudes. And we got to remember that this wasn't just some kind of side genre, some sidebar. There were hundreds of. This was it was like bowl of fruit. It was like nudes, up to and including, until, and I'm sure even in modern 21st century art classes, sketching and art classes where a nude model comes in, and everybody sketches the nude model. So that this is still a thing. This wasn't just some, there were hundreds of thousands of instances of the nude that were painted, but he'll say that there will be very few exceptions to everything that he said up to this point, although there are, he'll say. He'll make a case for this painting by Rubens of his mistress as being one which kind of captures her in a way in which we get, it was his second wife. he married when he was relatively old. We see her in the act of turning, her fur about to slip off her shoulders. He says, indeed, there are no longer newts. They break the norms of the art form. They are paintings of loved women, more or less naked. Among the hundreds of thousands of newts which make up the tradition, there are perhaps 100 of these exceptions, no more, he'll say. You know, in each case, the painter's personal vision of the particular woman he is painting is so strong that it makes no allowance for the spectator. What is he trying to say here? He's saying that, Rubens is painting his lover, right? And he's painting her in a kind of way in which he's kind of celebrating her, as the loved object. But he'll say that this is an exception due to the fact that, one could make the case, well, what's the difference? She's nude, she's there, she's available. She's a little more modest about it. Her gestures, her eyes seem to be have more depth. Berger will make the case that she's more of a person. There's more personhood in Rubens' depiction of her. And not only is there personhood, but it seems to exclude other men being able to take this up as if she were theirs, right? Or so Berger wants to make the case for, this. It doesn't make an allowance for a spectator. The painter's vision binds the woman to him so that they become as inseparable as couples in stone. The spectator can witness their relationship, but he can do no more. He is forced to recognize himself as the outsider he is. He cannot deceive himself into believing that she is naked for him. All right? He makes an argument for this, that there's a few exceptions that due to a certain stylistic expertise, a man can make a painting of a woman that he has an intimate relationship with, and I think this is also true for photography too. I think we see instances of photography, where it's like a couple will take pictures of each other, and you can't really make an argument that it's like they're a thing. The spectator can witness the relationship, but he can do no more. He is forced to recognize himself as the outsider he is. He cannot deceive himself into believing that she is naked for him. He cannot turn her into a nude. All right? He cannot turn her into a nude. All right? So what does that imply? Turning her into a nude. It implies that there is a certain amount of conditioning and attention on the part of the spectator that it's not enough just to have a nude or a girly pose or from a Playboy to Penthouse. It's not enough just to have that. You have to have a spectator that takes that thing up as being that thing, that makes that. There needs to be an intentionality there, that the spectator, whether it be I don't know about y'all, but back on George W. Johnson or wherever we were, in 5th, 6th grade, every once in a while a kid would go into his father's drawer, take his magazine and bring it in to show everybody else on the schoolyard, and everybody would sit there, in between innings and check it out, right? It's like, let's be honest about it. You can't turn her into a nude. The way the painter has painted her includes her will, her intentions, and the very structure of the image, and the very expression of her body and her face, right? We need to stress that what Berger is saying here is he's saying that this was an exception. This was an exception. It was not the rule. And it was an exception. It was not the rule, right? The rule was to depict women as a sexually available object for the man who wasn't thinking of her own needs. He was there solely for his sexual satisfaction. All right? This is a thing. People get crazy about this. Folks, don't get crazy. It was on an album cover that got bought and sold in a record store. They didn't sell that many of this, but who is it? If some of you know, it's like quiz. Who are these people? It's John Lennon from the Beatles and his wife, Yoko Ono. It was the cover of an album that they did called Two Virgins. Alright? They were being kind of ironic with it. But here, it's like, the question becomes, and the question I pose in class is usually one in which I ask, do you think that John and Yoko's intentions were to be naked in this picture or to be nude? Were they presenting themselves as naked? Remember, as having a personality, warts and all. Here I am. All right. Not, it's like, not unsexualized, right? I would say naked. I wouldn't say nude. They're together. They're trying to make a stand. Why nude? It's like, is it just John just being provocative? Yeah, it's that. But they're trying to say something about cultural mores and expectations. I don't know if John was showing off or not. He might have been. But once again, we need to pose this question about, has this whole idea, remember what we were saying at the beginning of the lecture, has this whole idea of the woman envisioning herself for the man, has it gone away? And I would say that this particular phenomena is proof positive that what Berger was saying in 1974 and 1975 is still alive and well and living in 2020. The whole idea of the selfie, folks. The selfie. Is the woman taking the picture for her? I don't think so. But that this tradition is still there and embedded in our culture and playing itself out in other forms of media, up to and including social media, Instagram, that there is still this cultural conditioning on the part of females to need to present themselves as an object as a sex object, as an object of consumption. And we do it it's like, when I say willingly, we have to understand that when something is done supposedly willingly in our society, willingly has always got to be put in quotation marks, right? Willingly, How many things did we do on our own free will, and how many things that we do that are expected from us, or that are driven by a society that places certain values, a value system out there. Value systems in sexuality. Value systems in the way that men and women continue to treat each other. All right? That this continues, that this goes on, and that's why I bring that up. He says, in 1975, today the attitudes and values which inform that tradition are expressed through other more widely diffused media, advertising, journalism, and television. That we see that in our ads, we still see this kind of preponderance of this tradition of the Western oil painting, right? And now we're going to be running over, so I got to wrap this up. But the essential way of seeing women, he says, the essential use to which their images are put, has not changed. He says no change here. No change. All right? Are there exceptions to this rule? Many of you media literate people will say, of course there are many, many exceptions to this rule. Even in glamour magazines. There was a Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover that was about the woman taking her power back, supposedly, in the whole Me Too movement. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of feminist pictures of women, taking their power back, showing themselves as blah, 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 right? But the essential way of seeing women, the essential use to which their images are put, has not changed. Women are depicted in a quite different way from men. Not because the feminine is different from the masculine, but because the ideal spectator is always assumed to be male. There is an assumption in our culture. Think about it. Watch television. Watch movies, even new movies. Watch old movies. Watch movies from, I know that's like root canal surgery for many of you. Watch movies from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. Do the ways in which women are is there an assumption of the maleness of the viewer? Do the research. Look at stuff and see if he's saying the truth. But because the ideal it's always assumed to be male, and the image of the woman is designed to flatter him. It's designed to flatter him. Go to any magazine rack, my friends. Go to any, click-on ad that's about perfume or lingerie or even anything, really. Cars, whatever, right? And then we'll end with this. If you have any doubt about this, if you have any doubt about what he's saying, do the following experiment. Choose from this book, this one, blah, blah, blah. The one that you're reading that's torture. Choose from this book an image of a traditional nude. Transform the woman into a man, either in your mind's eye or by drawing on the reproduction. Then notice the violence which the transformation does, not to the image, but to the assumptions of a likely viewer. So what is he trying to say here? This experiment, I could say a lot more about this, all right? But this experiment is more, it's like depending on what images you use, kind of like take a perfume ad with a beautiful, sexy girl, all right? And then like try to graft in your mind, he's saying, like the image of a man. And it changes it. It doesn't he's saying, it feels weird. It doesn't, it's like, because we're not conditioned to see that, right? It's like, I can say more about this because it's like, but I'll save it for later, all right? That's chapter 2. Remember, boom. We're not meeting on Tuesday. Boom. Be looking for the guidelines to the take-home essay, and be aware of the due date. All right, and boom, read chapters 3, episode 3, and while you're at it, you might as well get to chapter 4. Just finish off the book within the next week, because when we come back next week, I think I want to be like done. Because we need to get back on track with this. I hope you guys are doing well. I, for one, am doing okay. I'm getting by.